I've got a question for you. Right. Why is the app development taking so long?
Welcome to the App Secrets Podcast, where we're all about helping non-techies get apps designed, built, and marketed. And now your hosts, the superstar developers, the UX and product maestros themselves, the app marketing gurus. It's Francis Beasley and Darren David Taylor.
Why is the app development taking so long?
One of the major points is that the starters can usually be rushed, and the decisions around architecture maybe not necessarily so well thought through that, they really need to be thought through, and a lot of the pressure is put on to the developers to just get something out initially to show that, this design can be done, or, the API works. That's a classic. So one of the apps that I've worked on is, and you've worked on as well, Darren, is that, we came on and the app was built for a very specific purpose, and they came out with a whole new set of designs, which were really, they were forward-thinking, progressive designs, but they didn't think how that would impact the code base that was already written. So, unfortunately, which is, tends to happen in these sort of circumstances, you get people on board who, are really senior developers, but it takes a long time to change this code, and especially when it's been built through, months of development.
Years.
It can.
It was years.
Well, right, years exactly. In this case, that layering of all that extra code can really stack up to a point where it's a really inflexible system, and unfortunately, they didn't really bring us in to look at the designs. We were just given the designs, and I think we were asked many times why, what's going on, how come it's taking so long, and invariably the answer is always the same. It just, I don't know how you felt, Darren, about it, but it was quite difficult to deal with, and the only thing I can really think of there is just at the start of the project, it really there was a definite sort of smell of sort of inexperience really early on, or they built it for maybe a proof of concept, and that was taken on to be a production app.
That was definitely the case, wasn't it? Because you could see how even though it was coded in a very complex way, it was coded just to do one thing, and I think that was the problem. So the storage method of the way the app was storing the data was basically, it was represented in the interface, so that if you wanted to change the way the interface looked, you had to change the data
right from the server.
It was just absolutely terrible, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, like you say, it was definitely built for one thing, and it was definitely kind of built in a way that websites work. You kind of react to the data that's being given, as opposed to how mobile apps tend to be written. Tends to sort of have a very defined structure coming back, and this sort of ability to react to anything, really, it's really difficult to work with in that respect, because it was just anything you changed had impacts in other areas that you didn't. Yeah,
just to clarify that again, what it was doing, the app was doing, was it was rendering the data that came back from the server, wasn't it? That's it. Now I remember now. And
right, exactly, like HTML would.
And so what that meant was when we needed to make changes that hadn't been considered in that initial design, it just wasn't possible, because it would inevitably break everything else. It was just, I mean, I think it's just highlighting the problems that you get when you do these sort of strategies, and what you really need is some sort of intermediate data storage on the device, and then render that, don't you? So what you should do really is you should ask the server for some data, and then render it how you feel like on the client. And
yeah, exactly. I think once you're in that position,
I think we're going to we are going too technical here, but I think that the thing here, that the key thing that we're trying to say here is that it hadn't been thought about, had it, at the start? So what had happened was that they just did something to get it going. They said, "Yeah, what we'll do is when we change our mind later on, you'll change the design," and it just wasn't possible. And when when the team tried to do it, it took 5 times longer because it would have broken every single other thing in the app that had been done with those assumptions. And they probably knew early on that they were going to change the design later, but it was one of those teams where it was, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it, and it's just it just doesn't work that way, does it? I mean, if you were designing a big car, you wouldn't make a small car first and then change it halfway to be a big car, would you? Because that wouldn't work, and that's exactly the thing, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
So what I think the key thing, what you're saying, I'm going to say it for you, is what you should do really is you should design it properly from the start, with all the features in, and you should think about how everything's going to work, the API, the user interface, and that's basically it, isn't it? It's okay saying, oh yeah, we'll have an MVP, but an MVP really is something you should half throw away to get the real version done, because an MVP takes a week and an app takes a year. I mean, that's potentially the numbers you're looking at. So the priority is that you get that version, the real version of the app, engineered properly for all the features that are going to go in it. And that is what you're saying, isn't it? It's people just rush into development, and let's get going. Yeah, we'll use the architecture that we did for the MVP. Yeah, we need something out for the shareholders. We need to show something, and it's just rushing. It's rushing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and it makes it, like we mentioned, it makes it really difficult to work on. It's just totally inflexible, and because those decisions were rushed at the start, the ability to kind of even sell those decisions to the business. I mean, I remember talking to them, and it was like, oh, it's dynamic. It means we can add anything, and that wasn't true at all. It was actually 5 times harder than working on, just like you were saying initially, like you could just get yourself a database, put all that information into it, and then render that how the app can. I mean, you can change that however many times you want. And, okay, it takes time, but it's not that long in comparison to this, where everything is kind of rendered on the fly.
Yeah, it was definitely really a shortcut. Difficult. It was just a shortcut. It was a shortcut that looked good, and it wasn't. Yeah,
and of course, like we were really starting to hint on there, was as soon as the business came and wanted to change the designs, all the requirements for the app, it really, I mean, it took an awful long time. It took server development as well as, intense app development as well, to even get it anywhere near.
I think they struggled more than the client side, actually, the server, if you remember, because they were being forced initially to output their API in this special way that wasn't REST compliant in any manner, was it? And then later on, when the changes were made to the user interface, because we had to have the data in a more REST-like manner, in a REST-like format, then they had to make the changes their side to do that. So then they had to have 2 systems that coexisted, so the old code would work. And that really was the problem, wasn't it? It was the 2 systems coexisting, and the management did expect everything to just be easy, and they were saying stuff like, well, it works on this screen, and it's like, well, that's the old system, and to have 2 systems in an app, I'd forgotten about that, we had 2 systems at the same time.
Yeah, that was really difficult. That was a nightmare situation, really.
But really, if they just...
really, ultimately, what we should have done is just... What should have happened is that, you take a couple of steps back, look at what you've got, and say, okay, we managed to get the app out until this point using this system. There's a level of tech debt now that has come around by that. Their server costs were high. It wasn't the best system at all, and so they should have just taken a couple of steps back, reworked it, stripped it all out, rewritten that back end, and then we would have rewritten the front end, and then it would have been flexible going forward. But it's so difficult as a company to say, okay, yeah, we're going to do, say, 3 months development, and at the end of it, not necessarily see any change.
I'll get back to square one if you're lucky, yeah.
Right. It's like, oh, so in 3 months we'll have what we've got now. Where, you know, a lot of companies are looking for investment. A lot of companies are trying to get some sort of retention on their app, trying to get new users. And so a lot of these companies are thinking, if we put out new features all the time, then that could, you know, gain retention. Shareholders might be really happy that we've gone with that. It might open up a whole new market. And that's a level of, to say, oh yeah, we're going to take those 3 months off and just fix these decisions at the start that were rushed, is really hard. You know, that's a hard sell right there. And very few companies would appreciate your experience. I mean, because we're both very experienced developers, so it's, you know, to actually say that to them is our recommendation, and it's such a hard sell. Yeah, really difficult.
Yep, definitely. I think that answers that question, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think that was all right.
I think the question definitely is that, well, the answer is that you've said really is that get it right first time.
Maybe not necessarily get it right first time, but definitely right, don't close doors.
Yeah, that's. I think
that's the problem. Is you've got to keep it
design.
as
revisit that design and check it and check. That's what happens, isn't it? You go down a path and it's like, oh yeah, sometimes I've seen like where, you know, that they'll get a few. Oh my god, if they're very few cases I've seen where they've actually had any wireframes, to be honest, that are decent enough. To show the whole app to the whole team, because I mean that's the key, isn't it? Really, to be able to show.
It's definitely been able to see what is coming up. It's really difficult to theoretically imagine what's going to show on which page, and how it's going to come from, you know, APIs or on board, you know, data or anything like that. And then as soon as you throw in offline, it's just adds a completely different dimension. I mean,
that's, you know, where that comes from though. That's the the founders not understanding the technical problems though. So what they'll do is they'll assume that, like you've just said, with an app that works offline and offline. So they won't know there's a problem there. So it's, I mean, a lot of it's our fault really. So if they don't know the problem exists, they won't actually think about it or make any provision in any way for it. So it's our job really to make sure they understand that they want that later. When they, you know, that case where they'll show you some wireframes, right, and you go, oh yeah, that's fine. Well, I mean, we don't generally, but you know, we used to. it's like, yeah, that's fine. And then you've never had discussions about so many things that are going to come down the line, that all these assumptions they've made. I mean, for example, you know, with the client you were just talking about, when they used to say stuff like, oh, well, you've done it in that screen, I assumed it would just work in this screen. And it's like, well, no, not at all, because that's completely different. That's as a result of, you know, a Facebook share, something completely different.
Yeah, right.
And they assume this is all going to be free. And to add to that, what they do is they make estimates for you on how long it's going to take, based on their assumptions. So that shows how far reality is from the truth of how long things are going to take. They've got, not necessarily making estimates, but they've got these ideas of how the relative complexity of the different things, and they're trying to manage that on their side, but they don't know. And that's, so I think that's the thing. I think if you're going to get a developer, you need to get a developer that understands, you know, both the business side, where the product's going. I think it's key for the developer to understand exactly where the product's going, you know, short and long term, and try and have that discussion early on. And really, I think what you're saying, it's like that early design stage really should be like 20 or 30% of the project. It should be ensuring that every single thing is talked about before you start, because, you know, it's okay knocking an MVP out, that's fine. Getting that first version out is a different thing. You know, proving something's possible is one thing, but then making it into a real product, you need to know every single thing that's going in there from day one. And it does sound like I don't think it's over engineering to know exactly what's going to go in the app, because otherwise you're guessing, aren't you? And the founder may think, oh yeah, of course we can put that in. The offline context is the exact one. For example, that app we were just talking about relied on you being online all the time, and they may say, oh yeah, surely it can't be that hard to make it an offline app, and it's like, no, actually that's impossible, because it's effectively a web browser. But that conversation was never had at the early stage, was it? But it was actually impossible, wasn't it, to using that architecture to make it online.
You could have done it, but it wasn't.
Well, I say impossible. It would have been prohibitive. Would have been prohibitive.
Right, and you would have ended up in a more rigid structure down the line, because it would have just embedded what you had even more.
Yeah.
Just really. But then on the flip side of that, you end up with companies who do take the time to do that, and that's a really nice experience when you do get that.
Yeah, it's generally the companies that I've got experience, and you find that most with digital agencies, they always wireframe everything out because they've made 1,000 apps before, and
exactly,
and they know.
And you come on board, and what's going to be happening.
Yeah,
it's all been thought about.
I think I won't go on anymore because I think that's probably enough, isn't it, for this? Anyway, Francis, didn't you have a guide or something that people can download?
Yeah, I do, exactly. It covers a lot of what we've just talked about, and it's at the apptroubleshooter.com. So that's www.theapptroubleshooter.com. I have a book that I've written on there with many different questions around this, and really good sort of just explanations around what you can, and maybe the decisions that were made really early on or halfway through that could impact and delay your app development.
Okay then, that's it then, mate.
Alright.
The end.
The App Secrets Podcast, where we're all about helping non-techies get apps designed, built, and marketed. Check out the show notes and archives on theappsecrets.com.